Yeah, well, when the proposal was made, nobody in the UN or even in our Ministry of External Affairs was aware that this was going to be made. So it's 27 September 2014 when our Prime Minister requested the General Assembly to have 21st June every year declared as the International Day of Yoga. That meant that the implementation of this proposal was to be done by the Permanent Mission of India in New York. And one of the advantages of a proposal which doesn't have a long background and is that it is a fresh proposal. And therefore, the response of our partners in the General Assembly would also be a fresh response. And I think that that helped us to actually decide on two or three things in our campaign to get this implemented. The first was that since there was no background, we didn't have to go to any of the committees of the General Assembly, but we could go directly into the General Assembly plenary. And that helped us to compress the time frame a lot, because if an issue goes to a committee, it takes its own time and then it's voted out of the committee and then considered in the General Assembly. So we didn't have to face that time obstacle. The second thing that happened was that we had to choose an existing item on the General Assembly's agenda approved that year. Otherwise, this would have to be inscribed for the next year. So when we looked at the approved agenda of the General Assembly that year, we found that the Prime Minister's proposal would fit very nicely with discussions on global health. And at that time, in 2014, we had just completed discussing the Sustainable Development Goals. And there is a Sustainable Development Goal specially focused on health. So we decided that this proposal for declaring an International Day of Yoga should be considered under the existing agenda item of the General Assembly on global health. And that meant that the item would be approved by the General Assembly in December. So we gave ourselves this time frame of working to have this idea discussed and then agreed to between the end of September and December 2014. And this was a decision taken by us in the permanent mission, because obviously these are the issues which the all permanent missions in New York have to know and have to deal with. The third decision that we had to take was how to get a majority of the members of the General Assembly to agree to this proposal. Because since it was a proposal of a general nature, we needed to have a majority in the General Assembly to agree to adopt it. And in the 193 member General Assembly, a majority meant 97 countries had to agree to adopt it. So these were the three big considerations that were in our mind when I and my team of 8 diplomats had decided to go out into the field and bat to have this proposal adopted and to succeed in it. And I must say that when we look back, all these three issues that we identified ourselves actually played a very important role in having the proposal discussed and adopted in a record of 75 days. I think that is a record for any such proposal in the United Nations General Assembly, that they have never had, and I think after that they have not had a proposal which has been adopted within 75 days and by 177 co-sponsors. So that meant that all 193 countries agreed, because it's a unanimous resolution. And out of the 193, 177 member states of the General Assembly became co-sponsors, which meant that they also took ownership of the Prime Minister's idea to declare International Yoga Day. Now, when we began to convene the meetings of the General Assembly informally, and that was left to India as the initiator of this idea, we found that the response was very, very supportive. And it was supportive for 2 or 3 reasons. One was that yoga by itself is a way of life which is practiced not only in India but in many other parts of the world. And that was a voyage of discovery for me and my colleagues, because, for example, when the ambassador of Mozambique said he wanted to co-sponsor, on his country wanted to co-sponsor this proposal, he explained that in Mozambique, yoga was very popular because they were using yoga to develop tourism along their coast of the Indian Ocean. So, you know, I had not heard of such a link between yoga and tourism, but obviously in Mozambique, this was a very popular activity. And similarly, there were countries where yoga was very popular on the ground. I mean, we were in New York, and in New York for 10 years before the Prime Minister's proposal, every year on June 21st, the Association of Shops at Times Square, which is the heart of Manhattan, had themselves voluntarily been conducting yoga by blocking off the streets of Times Square and making them into a yoga practice space. So I think that this kind of support played a role in getting this enthusiasm and the energy. And you have to really sit in these meetings to understand that there was a positive energy which went into supporting this idea. So it was, as we said, an idea whose time had come. And therefore that was very important. Now, in terms of the actual support and the co-sponsorship, and there was no voting, so the co-sponsorship was an important indicator. We found that a lot of countries which became co-sponsors were areas where there had been a strong influence of the Indian diaspora or of Indian non-governmental organizations which were active in propagating yoga. And therefore, we got support from the Pacific Islands, we got support from Latin America. These are regions where politically, we have never looked at the kind of support that is there for an idea like yoga. And I think that this played a role in actually increasing the number of co-sponsors who came forward and said that, no, we would also like to be part of the resolution when it is adopted. And the only issue, and that's an issue which happens with the United Nations system, is that the question was asked by some delegations that where would the budget come from? And the answer to that question, and that is a very interesting and important point, I think, is that the answer to that question was that these activities would be commemorated every year on 21st of June through voluntary contributions. So there was no impact on the United Nations general budget to set aside some funds for marking the International Yoga Day. Instead, it was a ground-up approach. It was based on voluntary contributions. And when you see every year when the International Yoga Day is marked, you see how it has expanded. I mean, there are countries where thousands, tens of thousands of people have actually come out to mark the International Yoga Day, and they are doing it voluntarily. They arrange their own transportation, their mats, their equipment, and of course they bring themselves. So this shows that the idea was not only an idea for governments in the General Assembly who were represented as member states, but it was also an idea which had a tremendous support from outside the member states, on the ground, and especially from the non-governmental and civil society, youth and women. So, this was a good example of how the United Nations can actually have an initiative which reflects the words of the UN Charter, which begin with "We the Peoples." So the Yoga Day initiative is actually a good example of how to implement the idea in the UN Charter of "We the Peoples," because it is a combined multiple stakeholder activity. And I think that on the 11th of December, when I had to introduce the draft of the resolution to the General Assembly and propose that it should be adopted, it was a very proud day for us as a country, of course, because we were able to implement a proposal made by our Prime Minister within 75 days. But it was also a very proud day for those of us who worked in the multilateral system, because it showed that the system was responsive to ideas which were inclusive, which were forward-looking, and which were meant to improve the relationship between man and nature, and improve the health of both humanity as well as of nature, because this is something that does not really impact on adversely on the environment or create any other issues. So I think that in both these perspectives, it was a very proud moment, 11th of December in the morning, when I stood at the podium of the General Assembly and proposed that the draft resolution, co-sponsored by 177 member states, should be adopted. And that sense of pride, those of the people who saw the webcast, because the United Nations TV had webcast this, when you hear the names of all the co-sponsors, I think it's the only resolution which has taken more time to be adopted because of going through the names of 177 co-sponsoring countries than because of the content of the resolution, because the content was absolutely not controversial. And when it was gavelled, it was a very, very proud moment for all of us. And I'm glad that I was able to be in New York, leading our team, and our very gifted diplomats who all had an extensive network of friends who all responded so positively. So that was what I remember, and I wanted to say about how this proposal was proposed and adopted. Thank you. Well, about yoga itself, as I think it just confirms that this is something that it's an activity which transcends and is of a global character. In the course of discussing this idea with my colleagues from the United States, was very pleasantly surprised to hear that Steve Jobs, the founder of Apple company, which is today one of the largest companies in the world, had unfortunately contracted a disease and died early. But in his instructions on his funeral, he had instructed that each of the guests invited for his funeral should be gifted a copy of the autobiography of a yogi. And that showed that even in the heart of what others would consider the materialist Western civilization, a company like Apple, you have in the vision of the founder of this huge company, the core of thinking of what we call yoga, the thought of yoga. And this is something that I think was an important reflection of a contribution of India to the global traditions, which was reflected and given back. So sometimes it is said, in giving you receive. And I think in the case of the International Yoga Day, by giving the idea, we received the confirmation that there was a tremendous support and an acceptance of this idea in all parts of the world. I mean, for example, one of the first co-sponsors was China. And I remember thinking of this idea and saying that I should ask the ambassador of China whether he would like to co-sponsor this proposal of our Prime Minister. And he met me in his embassy, and he looked at it, and we both discussed on how there was a link between the teaching of yoga in school in Shanghai and the teaching of Tai Chi in a school in New Delhi. And that had been focused upon during the visit, the first state visit of the new president of China, President Xi Jinping. And President Xi Jinping's wife actually visited the school in New Delhi, and there was a demonstration of the linkage between yoga and Tai Chi. So with this background, the Chinese ambassador sent this idea to to Beijing, and within a few days he got the approval of his government to become a co-sponsor. And at that time, of course, we were looking at so many linkages between India and the rest of the world. And one of the biggest linkages between India and China was brought through Buddhism. And as Nepal said when the resolution was adopted, the greatest practitioner of yoga in Nepal and in their tradition is the Lord Buddha, whom they call the Sakya Muni. So this is something that is of a common interest to our civilization and our culture, and we tapped into it. And I think that it showed that, and it provided the background to the focus that we have consistently made, and that our Prime Minister made this year at the United Nations General Assembly, of India acting for global welfare. And when people ask what is the meaning of this global welfare, I think the International Yoga Day is a good example of how we take initiatives in the United Nations which can actually help humanity, and to which the rest of humanity responds in a constructive way. The same with the International Solar Alliance initiative, the use of the energy of the sun as a renewable source of energy to offset the concerns to the environment caused by the use of fossil fuels. Similarly, these are initiatives which we have, of course, now put in the forefront in our participation during the 75th anniversary high-level meetings. But I think that they really demonstrate India's diplomatic standing, and also they demonstrate how this is accepted by the vast majority of the United Nations General Assembly. Thank you. Well, yes, I think that, with each of these ideas, the proof of the pudding is always in the eating, as they say. So the organization of the first International Day of Yoga in the United Nations was very special. And I have a lot of memories of that event. Late External Affairs Minister Srimati Sushma Swaraj came all the way to be present in the United Nations. What we had done was we decided to bring it out of the halls of the United Nations and use the open space. And the United Nations headquarters building has some very good open space available just outside its main entrance. And we were able to use that space, which had been renovated as part of the big renovation project that the United Nations undertook at that time. And it was a grand feeling to be outdoors. The rain, which had lashed the city, and during the night stopped. The sun came out, and we were able to commemorate the first International Yoga Day in the United Nations in such an appropriate manner that those who participated, including the UN Secretary General and his wife, Mr. Ban Ki-moon and his wife, they were both performing yoga at the celebration. So that was something I remember. The second was that all of us, and our minister was very particular, we all went to the Times Square in Manhattan, and in the middle of those thousands of yoga practitioners, we were welcomed and greeted, and this was put onto the main screen of Times Square, which otherwise is devoted to their financial or commercial activities. But this was a day on which the yoga, the first International Day of Yoga, actually was put onto the main display screens in the heart of Manhattan on Times Square. And this is a memory that will also remain with me. And then when we noticed and we got the photo reportage from around the world of what happened on 21st June 2015, it was incredible. It was obviously something which showed through this visual imagery. And I think that's been collected in a book and is now available. And I think on audiovisual data also it's available. That showed that this was something that was not limited to the hall of the General Assembly or the meeting rooms of the United Nations. It was something that was actually taken out of the United Nations, and it became a grassroots phenomenon. And every year, the International Yoga Day just builds upon this momentum. And now it's become a self-sustaining movement. And I'm really glad to have been part of it. Thank you.
As a permanent representative, sir, one of your major initiatives was also helping conclude negotiations on increasing reimbursements for UN peacekeepers. So India is one of the largest contributors towards UN peacekeeping. Why do you think India is so committed to peacekeeping operations?
Well, India is committed to peacekeeping operations because India is a member state which strongly believes in Chapter 6 of the United Nations Charter, which is titled the Pacific Settlement of Disputes. So when peacekeeping was introduced, it is not part of the UN Charter. It was introduced as a mechanism by the then Secretariat and endorsed by the member states in the Security Council. Then India was among the member states which were among the first responders to help this mechanism function. And the objective of the mechanism of peacekeeping was to keep the parties to the conflict apart so that space could be created for political diplomacy, something that is emphasized every time peacekeeping and peace and security is reviewed in the United Nations, is the primacy of the political method to reach peace and to sustain peace. Because the United Nations does not endorse the use of force as an end in itself. The United Nations Charter is committed to the peaceful settlement of disputes and to sustaining the peaceful settlement. So that is the broad sort of backdrop against which India's participation in UN peacekeeping missions has to be seen. And the fact that today we have contributed over 240,000 Indian soldiers under the UN flag in as many as 50 out of the 73 UN peacekeeping missions is the largest single contribution by any member state. And we are proud of that. But when we look at the ground on which the troops contributed by UN member states actually operate, then there are issues which we feel have to be also taken into account. And because this was not part of the negotiations in San Francisco on the UN Charter, we need to have this discussion and this review of how UN peacekeeping is used and how it can become part of the new concept of peace operations. This has to be discussed by member states, and we need a platform to do so. And I very much hope that when the UN member states decide to review how the provisions of the 1945 Charter have actually served the interests of the UN Charter, then the use of peacekeeping will be part of that review, and we'll come up with some of the solutions to the issues that we face on the ground. And I'll briefly mention one or two issues that we face on the ground. One is that the states which give the troops do not participate in the decision on how and where these troops are deployed. That decision is taken only by the 5 permanent members. And out of the 5, 4 of them do not really contribute so many troops. Now, one of them, China, has become a major troop contributor. But the decision on how these troops are used is not not a process in which the countries who are contributing their troops are involved with, if they want to. And the Charter actually is very interesting, because the Charter says that if there is any use of armed force, and I think peacekeeping now has been looked at as use of armed force because it's robust in nature and so on, then the country which contributes the troops under Article 44 of the UN Charter has the right to actually sit in the UN Security Council when the decisions are discussed. And as we all know, the decisions are taken only by the 5 veto-wielding permanent members, because if any of them do not like the decision, they can veto it. So they are the ones who decide. The second issue, and that was an issue which struck me when I reached, was the increasing exposure of UN peacekeeping troops to threats which were not foreseen even in the Security Council mandates. And in our case, it happened in South Sudan. We all remember that in July 2011, when the Security Council welcomed the independence of South Sudan and its entry as the latest member state of the United Nations General Assembly, we adopted a resolution. And the resolution committed a peacekeeping mission in South Sudan to help South Sudan transition to its economic and social stability. But instead of doing that, within 18 months, the UN peacekeeping mission itself became the target of a civil war which started in South Sudan. And Indian soldiers were among the first casualties. And that struck me as being something that needed to be responded to by the UN Security Council as soon as possible, because if they did not respond to it, it would just increase and it would spread over different missions. And unfortunately, that is what has happened. The number of casualties that are now taking place in UN peacekeeping are at their record height. And I think that unless the Security Council seriously takes steps to prevent this kind of violence from targeting troops on UN peacekeeping, the number of casualties will only increase. We have already reached almost 4,000 casualties. And India, as the largest contributor, is the single largest member state with the single largest number of casualties as well. So it's in our interest to have this reform take place in how the peacekeeping missions are deployed. Thank you. Well, India was the first UN member state to actually contribute a fully staffed unit of female peacekeepers in the UN peacekeeping mission in Liberia. That happened in 2007. It was the first time any member state had done it, and everybody looked to see what would be the impact of this new idea. And I think that in the period that the UN women peacekeepers were deployed in Liberia, they showed how they made a difference. And I think that the lesson that has been learned by the United Nations and by India from this experience is that the women peacekeepers actually become force multipliers when they're deployed on the ground. And that's because of at least two reasons. One is that a lot of the people who are impacted by violent conflict are women and their children. And the empathy between troops deployed on UN peacekeeping and the victims of violent conflicts is more when the victims, who are women and their children, interact with women peacekeepers, whom they find to be more understanding of the issues. And this was the experience in Liberia of the Indian women peacekeepers. The second reason, which we do not often speak of openly, but I think we must and speak of it more and more, is that a lot of the peacekeepers, men and women who go from countries like India, are actually from rural backgrounds. And if you see the impact of these violent conflicts where they are deployed is also in rural areas rather than in urban areas. So the impact on rural communities is something that is understood faster, and the solution to how to mitigate this impact is also suggested faster by people who come from rural backgrounds. And in the case of Liberia, this happened, and the women became role models. They brought their own Indian rural way of building societies and of sustaining societies where women play a role in our own rural structures. They brought that perspective into their interaction in Liberia. And the president of Liberia, who was elected President Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, a woman president, she gave the biggest sort of recommendation for the Indian women peacekeepers when they finally wound up the peacekeeping mission and the Indian peacekeepers came back from Liberia. And one statistic that she mentioned, which stayed in my mind, is that when the before the Indian women peacekeepers went to Liberia, only 2 out of 10 Liberian women would look at working in their national governance institutions like the police or controlling law and order as a profession. But by the time the Indian women peacekeepers left, as many as 8 out of 10 Liberian women wanted to emulate them and join the national governance institutions of Liberia to make them more resilient. And that is meeting the objectives of the entire approach of the United Nations on strengthening of national governance institutions. And in this case, by also empowering women. So this was a good sort of case study, which is now being looked at by many other countries. And India has decided to build on her experience. And now we have a component of women peacekeepers in South Sudan, which is today one of the most violent of conflict zones where UN peacekeepers are deployed. But Indian women have volunteered to go. And I think that that's the main point, that these are not conscripted people who are being sent here and there by their governments. In the case of Indian peacekeepers, they are all professional volunteers, and they are volunteering to serve in these very challenging conditions. And I must say that the impact that Indian women peacekeepers have had in Liberia and now in South Sudan, and we are hearing of that as well, is really something that makes you understand why we need to use more and more of this huge resource base that we have in UN member states, where women can actually take the lead and come up with solutions which probably their male counterparts would not have thought about. Well, this idea of having a memorial wall for the peacekeepers who had given their lives defending the UN Charter was an idea which came about in 2013-14, around that time, in the Committee on Peacekeeping Operations, which is called the C-34 Committee. And a lot of troop contributing countries understood that it was not only their troops who were casualties in these peacekeeping operations, but there was a collective sense of being the casualties of defending the principles of the UN Charter. And it was with this background, and we had a very experienced and a very supportive chair of the C-34 committee, who was the former foreign minister of Nigeria, Ambassador Ogbu. And Ambassador Ogbu had also served in the Security Council when Nigeria was in the Security Council. So she saw both sides of the picture. She saw how the decisions were taken on deploying the peacekeepers, and sometimes they were actually put in harm's way and became casualties. And she saw the concerns expressed by the countries which were contributing troops. So this idea then came together in the C-34 Committee on Peacekeeping Operations. And then in the course of brainstorming, it was felt that like major military powers have memorial walls. There is a famous Vietnam Memorial Wall in Washington, D.C., for example. Why not have a similar memorial for the peacekeepers who had given their lives for the UN Charter? When we agreed on this idea in 2015, and the General Assembly adopted it as part of the Committee on Peacekeeping Operations proposals, about 3,400 peacekeepers had died. Today, when you see, the number is crossed 4,000. So in the space of 5 years, 600-700 people have become casualties. So this is not going to end, the casualties. So the idea was to have a memorial wall And because we were all aware of the constraints on the UN budget and everything else that goes into these new ideas, we propose that the wall should be actually constructed in the UN headquarters compound, where there's already a space designated to commemorate the Nobel Prize given in 1988 to UN peacekeeping. And there's a fountain there, and there's some stone blocks which mention the Nobel Prize. So this was what was the background to the Leadership Summit on UN peacekeeping, which took place in New York in September 2015. And I must say that our Prime Minister was among the world leaders who participated in that summit, and who then said in his official speech that India is ready, including through financial resources, to contribute to the construction of this memorial wall. So it is my hope that now that we are sort of moving ahead in implementing so many of the ideas that are being given, that this memorial wall will also be constructed on the grounds of the UN headquarters in New York.